In the year 1900, there was an island far from any major civilization. It was unlike any other and untouched by human hands. It was a paradise hidden in the heart of the ocean. Every morning the sun cast a warm, and its golden light was over endless stretches of green forests. Tall trees were thick and healthy, and they stretched toward the sky as if reaching for the heavens. Vivid flowers bloomed in all colors imaginable and filled the air with the sweet scents of nature. Then birds sang as they soared through the sky, and the calm waves of the ocean lapped gently at the shore. So this island seemed to have its own heartbeat, a pulse of life and beauty. But the beauty of the island wasn't what attracted attention. No, because it was something much more secretive, something that was hidden deep within the island's forests. In 1901, the government selected this island for a highly classified project. Only the top scientists, handpicked for their knowledge and skill, were brought here. It was called the Eternal Life Project, a name that sparked whispers and rumors even among those who knew of it. The project was intended to change humanity forever. These scientists believed they had discovered a way to stop aging itself, and they dreamt of a world where no one would grow old, where life could be prolonged indefinitely. But this dream required complete secrecy, because if the world knew, it could cause chaos. Inside the island, high walls were built around the facility, cutting off the inner parts of the island. Guards armed with guns patrolled day and night, and their eyes were scanning every corner. No one was allowed inside without permission, not even the local people hired to bring supplies. Every shipment was inspected, and every visitor was recorded. Even the scientists themselves weren't allowed to talk about their work outside their specific labs. They each worked on separate parts of the project, often not even knowing what their colleagues were doing. For years, the island remained isolated, and the Eternal Life Project was hidden from the world. As time passed, the scientists grew excited. They believed they were close, and they thought they were on the verge of a breakthrough. Rumors spread among them, whispers that they had found the key to eternal youth. But they sensed there was tension too, and it was an unspoken fear. Sometimes, the scientists would look at each other with haunted eyes, as if they felt something was wrong, and as if they sensed a danger, lurking just beyond the edge of their understanding. But one day, everything changed. It began with a simple mistake. A scientist, who was exhausted from long hours, misread a formula. She added the wrong chemical to her experiment, not knowing the danger she had just unleashed. Suddenly, there was a loud, echoing explosion that shook the entire facility. Smoke poured into the halls, and alarms blared, filling the air with their piercing sound. Scientists and guards ran and tried to escape, but it was too late. When the smoke cleared, the once bustling facility was silent. Bodies lay scattered on the ground, and their eyes were wide open and frozen in terror. They were dead, but their faces showed fear as if they had seen something terrible just before they died. Whatever it was, it left no survivors. The island, once full of life, was now a place of death and silence. The bright and beautiful paradise had become a graveyard. No one knew what had happened, but rumors spread that something was still alive on the island. Something unnatural was born from the failed experiment. Then, the secrets of the Eternal Life Project remained, hidden and waiting, just like the island itself. After the disaster, word reached the mainland, and the government was alarmed. They had invested years of research and millions of dollars into the Eternal Life Project, and now it was in ruins. But even more than the money, it was the secrecy they feared losing. If anyone knew what had happened, it could lead to disaster. Then, they quickly sent investigators to the island, a team of highly trained agents and scientists, tasked with finding out what went wrong. The team arrived on the island early one morning, and the sun had barely risen, casting an eerie light over the empty buildings and the tall walls. Then they stepped off their boats and dressed in dark uniforms, and moved carefully, as if they were afraid of waking something. The team began their investigation and moved slowly through the deserted halls of the facility. Then they saw broken machines lay scattered everywhere, and thick dust coated every surface. They found bodies, dozens of them, lying where they had fallen. Each face was twisted in fear, as if they had seen something horrifying in their final moments. But as they searched, the investigators found nothing to explain the disaster. Every document had been destroyed, and every file was erased. All the records were gone. It was as if the island itself had swallowed every trace of the project. But the investigators could feel the island was watching them, and they sensed its silence was heavy and oppressive. They sensed a darkness here, something that went beyond science. Days passed, and the investigation team grew frustrated. No matter where they looked, they found only dead ends. Some of the investigators began to feel uneasy. They heard strange sounds at night, whispers in the empty halls, and footsteps that seemed to follow them. But whenever they turned around, there was nothing there. Finally, the government made a decision. They could not risk anyone else knowing about this place. They declared the island off limits and erased it from all maps. Every trace of the Eternal Life Project was buried, hidden in secret archives. The world was told that the project was a failure and the island had been abandoned. As the years passed, people began to forget about the island. The Eternal Life Project became a legend, a tale told in whispers. The island itself was lost, and it was hidden by time and memory. But even as it was forgotten, the island remained. Nature reclaimed it, vines grew over the walls, and the trees reached high above the buildings. Animals returned and filled the empty spaces with their sounds. The island looked peaceful again, almost beautiful, but beneath the surface, the darkness was still there, waiting. One day, someone would come. Someone would step onto the shore and unaware of the secrets buried deep within. And when they did, the island would be ready. In the year 2000, a group of treasure hunters heard a rumor. It was about a forgotten island. They were always looking for hidden places and old treasures. Their leader, Jack, was fascinated by tales of lost gold, jewels, and secrets buried long ago. Jack's team included Sarah, who was smart and careful, and Tom, who was brave but sometimes too daring. Jack had read about this island in an old book. The book mentioned that no one visited it anymore. It was marked dangerous and off limits, but the book also hinted at the treasure hidden deep in the forest. Then Jack couldn't resist, and he gathered his team and told them about his plan. This island is far and unknown, and no one has been there in years. So, imagine what we might find, he said. His eyes were shining with excitement. But Sarah was hesitant because she had heard strange things about abandoned places. "Are you sure it is safe, Jack?" she asked. Then Tom laughed. "Safe or not, we can handle it." His voice was loud and full of excitement. Finally, Sarah agreed. Together, they packed supplies, and they took maps, torches, food, and tools. Jack wanted everything ready for the journey. He knew this island wasn't on many maps, so he studied the route carefully. When they set off in their boat, the ocean was calm, but there was a strange feeling in the air. The island was hidden in the mist and waiting silently. They didn't know what was waiting for them, but Jack, Sarah, and Tom were ready to face anything, or so they thought. The adventure was just beginning, and as they got closer to the island, but they could feel an unknown danger lurking in the shadows. When they arrived, the island looked peaceful. The sky was clear, and the trees were tall and green. Birds chirped, and the breeze was soft. The place seemed untouched, a paradise lost in time. Jack, Sarah, and Tom stepped onto the sand, and they were amazed by the island's beauty. The beach stretched far, with soft, white sand under their feet. They walked forward and admired the scene and felt like they had found a hidden treasure. As they moved deeper into the island, they saw more beauty. There were bright flowers and strange plants. Everything looked perfect, and it was untouched by humans. Sarah took a deep breath and she whispered, "This place is incredible." But something felt strange because the island was too quiet. They couldn't see any animals except for a few birds. The silence was unsettling, like the place was holding a secret. Tom felt uneasy and he muttered, "It is too quiet." Then Jack brushed it off. "It is just nature, Tom. Relax. We are here to explore." They kept walking and not noticing the slight movements in the shadows. As they went deeper, the peaceful beauty started feeling strange, like something was watching them. But Jack, Sarah, and Tom pushed on because their eyes were set on the treasures they believed were hidden ahead. But they didn't know the beauty often hides darkness, and this island held many secrets. After a short rest, the group decided to explore further. Jack led the way, and they entered a thick forest. The air was humid, and the trees towered over them, blocking most of the sunlight. It was dark, with only slivers of light coming through the leaves. As they walked, they began to see strange things. There were old and rusty fences hidden behind thick vines. Strange symbols were carved into the trees, symbols none of them could understand. Sarah felt a chill and she asked, "Why are there fences here?" Jack shrugged. "Maybe it is from an old settlement or an abandoned project. This place was used once, remember," he said and tried to stay positive. But Tom felt uneasy. He looked around and his eyes were scanning the shadows. "I don't like this," he muttered. As they went deeper, they found more signs of the past. Broken equipment, rusted metal pieces, and strange markings on rocks and trees. Everything seemed abandoned, but it also seemed as if someone or something had been here, watching. The island was beautiful, but the more they explored, the more they felt like intruders, and they couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching their every move. As the day went on, the group grew tired, so they decided to camp near a small clearing. Jack set up a fire, and Sarah and Tom unpacked food. The forest around them was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly, they heard a rustling sound from the bushes and they froze. Then Jack stood up, flashlight in hand and pointing it toward the noise. "Who is there?" he called out. But there was no answer, just silence. Then, something stepped out of the shadows. It was an animal, but it didn't look normal. Its skin was pale, almost grey, and its eyes were strangely dull. The creature looked at them and moved slowly, almost like it was in pain. Tom picked up a stick, and he was ready to defend himself. But the creature just stared, then disappeared back into the forest. The group stood in silence, and their hearts were racing. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, and her voice was shaky. Jack tried to stay calm. "Maybe it was just a sick animal," he said, though he didn't believe his own words. The group tried to laugh it off, but a feeling of dread settled over them. They didn't realize that this was only the beginning, and that the true horror of the island had only begun to reveal itself. The next morning, the group decided to explore more. They walked deeper into the forest and eventually found an old and crumbling building hidden among the trees. They saw it was covered in vines, broken and abandoned, but there was a sign above the door. Then they saw the letters were faded and almost unreadable, but they could make out the words, "Research Facility." "This must be where the government project took place," Jack said, and his eyes were wide with excitement. But Sarah looked at the building nervously. "I don't think we should go in there," she whispered. But Jack insisted, wanting to uncover the truth. Then they entered the facility. The inside was dark and musty, filled with broken machines and empty rooms. The walls were covered in strange drawings, symbols, and notes written in a language they didn't understand. As they explored, Sarah found an old journal on the floor. She opened it, and the pages were filled with notes about experiments, strange plants, and Project Eternal Life. But the last few pages were smeared with what looked like dark stains, and the words were chaotic as if written in a panic. Then, the group felt a chill because they knew they had stumbled onto something dark, something the world was not meant to know. Then, they left the building, and their curiosity mixed with fear. Now they felt the island was different, less like a paradise and more like a trap. And they were right in the middle of it. After leaving the ruins, the group continued deeper into the forest, but the atmosphere had changed. The silence was heavier, and strange noises echoed through the trees. They could hear rustling sounds, faint whispers, and sometimes distant footsteps. Tom, usually brave, felt uneasy. "I don't like this place," he admitted, glancing nervously around. Jack tried to stay calm. "We just need to keep moving. We have come this far, and we can't turn back now." But Sarah sensed something was very wrong. She felt as if they were being followed. The shadows seemed to move, and the air grew colder. As they walked, they found more strange plants. Plants that looked unnatural, with twisting, dark roots and thick, green leaves. Some plants seemed to pulse like they were alive, so the group avoided touching them, sensing danger in every leaf and root. It was clear, the island was not just a simple, unforgotten place. It held secrets, secrets that wanted to remain hidden. And the deeper they went, the more those secrets tried to keep them from leaving. As the group ventured deeper, the forest seemed to grow darker. Even though it was midday, the trees blocked out much of the sunlight. Everything looked twisted, and the shadows were long and haunting. Jack tried to stay focused, but even he felt a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, they heard footsteps behind them. The group stopped and turned around quickly, but there was nothing there, just an empty forest. Tom squinted and tried to see into the shadows. "Did anyone else hear that?" he asked. Sarah nodded and whispered, "Yes, I thought someone was following us." Jack brushed it off, but he couldn't shake the feeling. Then, he tried to sound confident. "It is just the wind," he said. "Let's keep moving." But as they walked, the footsteps continued. They grew louder, echoing around them. Then, the group walked faster and tried to ignore the noise. But fear was growing in their hearts, and they felt trapped. With each step, the shadows seemed to close in around them, as if the island itself wanted them gone. They didn't know what was watching them, but they knew they were not alone. After hours of wandering, they came across a narrow and hidden path. The trail was barely visible and covered with vines and old roots. It seemed like no one had walked it for years. Then, Jack noticed strange symbols carved into the trees beside the path, symbols that looked ancient. Then, Jack said, "This path might lead somewhere important," and he was determined to find the truth, no matter the danger. Sarah hesitated, and she asked, "Do we really want to go deeper?" But Tom agreed with Jack. "We have come this far, let's see where it leads," he said. Then, they began following the path, pushing aside vines and branches. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Strange plants grew along the trail, with leaves that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. As they walked, they found more strange objects. Rusted tools, broken bottles, and even old clothes. Everything seemed abandoned, left behind in a hurry. It felt like the remains of the people who had been here long ago. The path grew narrower, and the air grew heavier. The group felt like they were stepping into another world where danger was hidden in every corner. They moved forward and unaware that they were walking toward their darkest fears. As they walked, they suddenly heard a loud rustling from the bushes. Then, they froze and looked around. They heard the noise grew louder and closer. Then, something burst out of the shadows. A strange creature, pale and thin, with empty, lifeless eyes. It looked like a person, but moved like an animal. The creature lunged at them, and they screamed. Tom swung his flashlight, hitting the creature's face. It let out a horrible screech, stumbling back. "Run," Jack shouted, pulling Sarah by the arm. Then, they sprinted down the path, and the creature closed behind. They could hear it breathing, and its footsteps echoing in the silence. The group ran, and their hearts were pounding, fear taking over. After a few minutes, they finally lost the creature. They stopped, gasping for air and looking back to see if it was still following. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, and her voice was shaking. Jack shook his head and tried to catch his breath. "I don't know. I think it was one of the scientists." The group looked at each other in horror. They realized the island was not just hiding secrets. It was hiding something far worse, and they had just encountered it. After the attack, they stumbled upon an old and abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. The cabin was small and looked like it hadn't been used in years. The door was broken, and the walls were covered in mold. Inside, they found a dusty table and some scattered papers. Sarah noticed a leather-bound journal on the table, and then she picked it up and opened it, flipping through the yellowed pages. The journal was filled with notes about experiments and strange plants on the island. One entry caught her eye. It read, "Day 42, the plants have started changing. They react to movement and seem to be aware of us. The serum has unexpected effects on humans, transformations that we did not foresee." Sarah's hands shook as she read the words aloud. The journal explained how the scientists were working on a project to extend life. But something went wrong, horribly wrong, because the people began to change and turn into the creatures they had seen. The group realized the island was a prison for the experiments, and they were trapped with the results of those failed experiments. That night, as they tried to sleep, the forest seemed to come alive with whispers. The group huddled around their small fire, listening to the strange sounds in the darkness, because soft and echoing voices seemed to call their names. Sarah covered her ears and tried to block out the sound. "I can hear them. It is like they are in my head," she whispered, and her eyes were wide with fear. Tom looked around and his face was pale. "It is like they are all around us. But there is no one there." Jack tried to keep calm. "It is just the wind," he said, though he didn't believe it. But the whispers grew louder and filled the air. The voices seemed to be begging and pleading as if they were the souls of those who had been trapped on the island long ago. Unable to sleep, the group stayed close together as their fear grew. They realized the island was not just home to monsters. It was haunted by the memories of those who had been lost here. As the sun rose the next morning, a faint mist lingered over the island. Jack, Sarah, and Tom ventured deeper into the forest, hoping to find a safer route back to their camp. But the further they went, the more they felt the island, pulling them inward as if it was drawing them towards something they couldn't resist. After trudging through thick vegetation, they stumbled upon a strange and hidden garden. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The trees and plants here were twisted, with leaves that shimmered in hues of dark green and deep purple. The air was thick and heavy with an unfamiliar smell that made breathing a challenge. Jack squinted and tried to take it all in. "What is this place?" Tom walked ahead, spotting an old, unrusted sign near the entrance. He brushed away the dirt and read aloud, "Caution. Toxic plants, do not touch." The words sent a chill through them. This wasn't just any garden. It was dangerous, but the plants were strangely captivating. Tall stalks bore bright, luminescent flowers in unusual colors: red, blue, even black. The petals seemed to pulse gently, like they were alive, breathing in sync with the island. Jack, curious and entranced, stepped closer to a particularly beautiful flower. Its petals were a deep and vibrant red, almost glowing in the dim light. He reached out, but as he leaned in, a dizzying sensation washed over him. The edges of his vision blurred, and he stumbled backward, and his heart was racing. "Jack," Sarah rushed forward, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. "Don't touch anything here. This place isn't safe." Jack blinked and tried to clear his vision. He could feel his pulse racing and his breath shallow. "I don't know what came over me. It is like that flower was calling to me." Tom looked around nervously and said, "This whole place feels wrong. It is as if these plants are waiting for us to make a mistake." Then they moved away from the garden, and each of them felt the weight of the island's presence more intensely. It was becoming clear that this wasn't just a place. It was a maze designed to trap them. Every path they took felt like it was leading them deeper into danger. Every turn a potential trap set by the island itself. As they continued, Sarah glanced back at the poisonous garden one last time. Do you think this was part of the experiment?" Tam nodded slowly. "It has to be. They must have altered the plants to be dangerous. Maybe to protect the island, or keep people from escaping." Jack shivered. "It feels like the island is alive, like it is aware of us and doesn't want us here." They walked in silence, each lost in thought. The beautiful and deadly garden had shown them that the island was more than it seemed. It was a place of darkness, filled with traps and secrets that wanted to keep them there forever. That night, they huddled around a small fire near their temporary camp. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but sleep came slowly. The eerie quiet of the island felt oppressive, and every rustle in the darkness made them tense. Sarah closed her eyes, hoping for a few hours of rest, but as soon as she drifted off, her mind was filled with strange visions. In her dream, Sarah found herself standing in a grand laboratory from a century ago. Scientists were bustling around, dressed in white coats, their faces serious and tired. The room was filled with machines and strange devices that hummed with power. She watched as one of the scientists prepared a syringe filled with a glowing green liquid. His hands were shaking. He injected it into his own arm. Sarah felt like she was one of them, seeing everything through their eyes. She saw the desperate looks on their faces, the fear that clung to them like a shadow. She understood that they were racing against time, and their bodies were deteriorating as they tried to find a way to survive. Suddenly, the dream shifted, and she was outside in the poisonous garden. The scientists were there too, gathering plants and extracting strange liquids. She saw their faces contort as they inhaled the toxic fumes, and watched as their skin began to change, but their eyes were losing their humanity. Then, Sarah woke up with a start and gasping for air. Her hands were trembling, and her heart was racing as if she had been running. She looked around and saw Jack and Tom staring at her, concern etched on their faces. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice soft. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. "I had a dream. It felt so real, and I saw the scientists. I saw what they were doing here. They were experimenting on themselves, on the plants, everything. They were trying to make themselves immortal." Tom's eyes widened. "Are you saying the island showed you this?" Sarah nodded. "It wasn't just a dream. It felt like the island was telling me its story, like it wanted me to understand." They sat in silence, each of them grappling with the weight of Sarah's vision. The island wasn't just hiding a dark past. It was actively reaching out to them, pulling them into its memories, its nightmares. Jack shivered. "If the island wants us to know the truth, then maybe it won't let us leave until we do." The next morning, Tom suggested they explore more of the area, hoping to find something useful or maybe a way to escape the island's hold. As they wandered, they noticed the forest becoming thicker, the trees denser, their roots tangled and twisted. After a few hours, Tom spotted something unusual on the ground. A small, rusted handle, almost hidden beneath the moss. He brushed away the dirt, revealing a trapdoor. It was old and covered in mold and moss, but it looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Tom asked, "Do you think this leads somewhere?" looking back at Jack and Sarah. Jack hesitated. "I am not sure, but we have to check it out." The three of them lifted the trapdoor, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the ground. The air that wafted up was stale and cold, carrying a faint metallic smell. They descended slowly, and their flashlights barely illuminated the darkness. At the bottom, they found themselves in a small and hidden lab. The walls were lined with strange machines, covered in dust, and shelves filled with jars containing dark and murky liquid. Tom approached one of the machines, and his eyes were wide as he tried to make sense of it. On a nearby table, he found a notebook. The pages were brittle, but the writing was clear. It was filled with notes on life extension and transformation, experiments that hinted at horrific consequences. "This is where they did it," Tom whispered, his voice trembling. "This is where they experimented on themselves." But before they could read further, they heard a noise above them, a shuffling, scraping sound. The creatures were back, and they had found the group's hiding place. Panic surged through them as they realized they were trapped. They could hear the creatures scratching at the trapdoor and try to get in. The hidden lab had become their prison. An escape seemed impossible. As the creatures closed in on them, Jack, Sarah, and Tom hurried to hide deeper in the underground lab. Their hearts raced, and fear filled the air as they could hear the creatures above, sniffing and scratching and trying to find a way inside. Suddenly, the sounds grew fainter, as if the creatures were leaving. Jack took a breath and motioned for the others to stay quiet. They waited in silence until they were sure the creatures were gone. Once it was quiet again, Sarah whispered, "What are those things? Are they even human anymore?" Tom shook his head. "They were human once, but they have been changed, because their experiments gone wrong." Then, Jack took a deep breath and struggled to stay calm. "We need to get out of here. We have seen enough." But just as they thought about leaving, they heard a soft whirring sound. The machines in the lab had started up on their own, as if triggered by their presence. The screens on the walls flickered, and old recordings began to play, showing footage of the experiments conducted on the island. The group watched in horror as they saw scientists injecting each other, testing on themselves, and gradually transforming into the very creatures that had been chasing them. They realized they were watching the dark truth of the island's past, a truth that was now reaching out to them, pulling them into its twisted history. As they watched the last of the footage, Tom noticed a piece of paper tucked under a machine. He picked it up and read it aloud. It was a note from one of the lead scientists explaining the final step of the experiment. The note revealed that the goal of the project was not only to extend life, but to transfer souls into the plants and animals around them. The scientists had been trying to create a living island, where every plant and creature held a piece of their consciousness. Sarah gasped as she realized the terrible truth. This island, it is alive and it remembers everything. That's why it feels like it is watching us. The group was horrified and realizing that the island itself was a trap, a living entity that held the memories and souls of everyone who had died there. It was the ultimate prison, holding on to their energy and refusing to let anyone leave. They knew they had to get out before the island trapped them too, but the way out was filled with dangers. The path back was long, and the creatures were still lurking outside. Jack looked at Tom and Sarah, his eyes determined. "We have to make a run for it. We know the way back to the shore, but we have to be fast and careful." The three of them quickly gathered their supplies and quietly made their way back up the trapdoor, listening for any sounds. The forest was eerily silent, as if the island was aware of their escape plan. As they moved through the trees, they heard strange whispers again, growing louder and louder. The island seemed to be trying to confuse them, to turn them around and trap them in its depths forever. Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder and turned around, but there was no one there. She shivered and felt the presence of something unseen watching them. Tom whispered, Stay focused. We're almost there. They could see the faint glow of the shore in the distance. But just as they thought they were free, a group of creatures appeared in their path, blocking the way. They looked more monstrous than ever, their eyes empty and lifeless and their bodies twisted and deformed. Then the group froze and knew they had to find another way, but the island seemed determined to keep them there. They realized they would have to outsmart the island to find a way to escape once and for all. In their last moments on the island, Jack, Sarah, and Tom felt the weight of every step they took. The whispers grew louder, and the creatures closed in from every direction. The island was fighting them and determined to keep its secrets hidden. Then Jack looked around and spotted a small boat by the shore, hidden among some rocks. There, that is our only chance. Then they ran toward the boat, but the creatures were close behind, and their growls echoed in the night. Just as they reached the boat, one of the creatures lunged at them, but Jack fought it off and used the last of his strength to push it back into the water. Then Sarah and Tom jumped into the boat, pulling Jack in as he scrambled aboard. They grabbed the oars and started rowing as fast as they could, because they felt the island's pull as if it didn't want to let them go. The waves grew stronger and crashed against the boat, but they kept rowing, refusing to look back. The island loomed in the distance, and its dark silhouette faded as they moved further away. As they finally reached safety, they looked back one last time. They saw the island now was quiet, shrouded in mist, as if it was going back to sleep and waiting for its next visitors. The three of them sat in silence, exhausted but relieved. They knew they had barely escaped, but the memories of the island would haunt them forever. They had seen the secrets of a place that was meant to be forgotten, and they knew they could never truly escape its shadow. The island, alive and breathing, continued to guard its secrets, and was waiting patiently for the next curious soul to wander too close. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks,